Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with Pastor Adam Weber is brought to you by Compassion International. For $38 a month, you can release a child from poverty. Compassion.com/sportsspectrum is the website, and Compassion International is the most trusted child development ministry in the world. Over 2 million people being released from poverty in the last year alone. Let me say that number again. 2 million people being released from poverty. 2 million children because of Compassion International and people like you and I who can sponsor a child and release them from poverty. Check out the website again, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, $38 a month, food, education, medical care, vocational training, all done in the name of Jesus. It's the best $38 you'll spend every single month. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum and sponsor a child today. Today on the podcast, we welcome Adam Weber. He is the pastor of Embrace Church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The church has grown to 6 campuses in 2 states and was dubbed the fastest growing church in America in 2017. Adam and I have connected on Twitter, and really great guy. He's been a nice mentor to me and a guy who I can talk to about different things. He's also a crazy sports fan, including the Cincinnati Bengals, where he has what he calls a very unhealthy obsession with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's married to Becky, his wife, and has 4 children. He also hosts a podcast called The Conversation. And this church that Adam started was back in 2006 at the age of 24. And this interview, this podcast that Adam and I did was just fun. And I had a lot of questions. He's a pastor, so I could literally spend it hours upon hours asking him questions about faith and about life and all that. And Adam was just so gracious in offering up his time and offering up his encouragement and responses here on the podcast. Lots of fun. Adam, I forgot to mention, wrote an awesome book called Talking with God. And he's the author of that book that has really helped me in my walk, just as far as learning how to pray and the importance of prayer. And Adam writes it in such a simple way for so many to understand. I'm not a biblical scholar or a PhD or a doctor or anything like that. I'm just a simple guy, and I need a simple book to understand and to help me and encourage me. And Adam wrote that book. It's called Talking with God. Listen to our conversation here. Lots of fun with Adam Weber, the pastor of Embrace Church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Welcome to Adam Weber. Welcome, Adam.
Jason, just an honor to be on. Just love and appreciate you so much.
Me too, man. I'm excited. This is always fun because, at first when we started this podcast, I remember thinking there's no way we're going to have pastors on. Why would we have pastors on the podcast? It's sports and faith. And then we said okay to Matt Chandler and we said okay to Louis Giglio. And I'm like, man, we got to have more pastors on. And then you and I are friends, obviously, and I'm like, well, we got to talk to Adam because he's a huge sports fan. You're like this diehard Cincinnati Bengals guy, right? Which is so bizarre.
It's crazy. I am definitely a diehard Bengals fan. Speaking of sports, I did have 11 sacks my senior year of high school. So
that's good.
You could
11 sacks. That's not on like Super Tecmo Bowl. That's on the real thing on the field, right?
That was the real thing. And yes, we have 11-man football in South Dakota.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, how does the Bengals come into the picture here? Where does Cincinnati, when you grew up in South Dakota, right?
Grew up in South Dakota. I had an older cousin that was a Broncos fan. Okay. And when I was 3 years old, he gave me an Isaac Curtis football card, a receiver for the Bengals.
Yeah, I remember
And since having that card, I still have that card somewhere on my shelf. Awesome. Since that day, I became a diehard. Cried myself to sleep after the Bengals lost their second Super Bowl to the Niners.
Oh, Joe Montana.
Yeah, and then I went to seminary 30 miles from where Bengals do the training camp and like 65 miles from Paul Brown Stadium.
Okay.
And so my psycho fanness went from crazy to insane. So,
oh man. Well, we just had on Seth Seth Morrison from the band Skillet a couple weeks ago on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you know Seth at all, but you should know him because he's a diehard Bengals fan as well. And I always say, man, probably the only two Bengals fans that I know are Seth and you, but that's all right. We digress. But, when you say you love the Bengals, you're not just saying either, like, you could say you love the Yankees or you say you love the Cowboys or any of these teams that are sort of fair weather teams. But when you're with the Bengals and you say you're a Bengals fan, you're not lying here because
exactly.
The team hasn't won in forever and has never won a Super Bowl. So you are a diehard fan. How hard is that to stay with a team? And maybe it isn't hard, but how hard for you is it to stay with a team that's just had so much, I don't want to say misery, but sports misery.
Misery. It's there's not many of us. I've often wondered if they started winning Super Bowls like the Patriots, I wonder if I'd still like them. I have a heart of an underdog, but there has been some moments that just bring you to your knees. My quick story, I made the mistake of inviting people over when the Bengals made the playoffs for the first time in centuries, what felt like. Their first game against the Steelers, one of the first plays of the game, Carson Palmer goes down.
Yes.
And a buddy of mine said, gosh, that's too bad. And inside I was like, too bad? I'm going to burn this building down. I was like, you just say too bad? No, it's not too bad. Like, this is catastrophic. What just happened? And I went into my bedroom, like, really kind of quietly, and I didn't make a scene at all.
Right.
And 10 minutes later, my wife joins me and she's like, are you doing okay? And I was like, just trying to get my bearings. So there's been some hard moments, but we are looking into an exciting season.
Here we go.
New coaching, new leadership in place to come around Andy Dalton. That's going to be a good year.
Yeah, and Andy's been on this podcast, and he's part of our ministry, and just such a great dude. I don't know, have you ever had a chance to talk to Andy or get to know him at all?
I have. We connected a couple of years ago and every so often exchange messages, but just through and through a class act and just a wonderful human being. And just it's exciting to see God using him much more than just football. So, yeah, he's a good person. Wonderful fella.
Are you one of those diehards, Adam, in the sense of you're watching every game after church, you got the DirecTV Sunday ticket, you're living and dying on every play, or because you're a pastor and Sundays are a tad bit busy for you, are you not able to kind of watch every game maybe the way that you used to?
No, so I have the NFL app on my phone.
Nice.
And on Sundays when the game's starting, the very first thing I do after service is I check and see how the game's going, and if I'm able to watch it, I watch it right there. So I am a Bengals.com person several times a day.
Right.
So it's a little bit of an obsession. My wife always says, I don't know if I like you very much when you watch the Bengals. I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know. Okay, maybe I need to like do a fast from watching and cheering for this team. So. But no, it's fun. Like it's a lot of fun. Just it's fun to cheer on a team and have somebody that you're rooting for, regardless of how they're doing, is just exciting.
Adam Weber is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. So you pastor a church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, a church that in 2017 was dubbed the fastest growing church in America. It's pretty cool to hear that. When did the idea of being a pastor begin to take shape for you? Because you said you had 11 sacks your senior year of high school. There could have been a future there in the NFL. Who knows?
No. So, yeah, that's the furthest thing. No, I actually never wanted to be a pastor, believe it or not. So I grew up Lutheran. All my extended family's Catholic. I had a radical transformation in my life as a sophomore in high school. Heard about a relationship with Jesus for the very first time. And it was the greatest news that I had ever heard. Truly the greatest news that I mean, it transformed everything about me. And from that point on, wanted to tell as many people about Jesus as I could. If you're talking with me for longer than 5 minutes, you're going to hear about Jesus, just because I mean it's my everything. And so, but I always thought I would bring Christ into the business world. Just have a entrepreneur heart, just in general. So went to college for business and marketing. Still to this day, I'll sit down with someone who's in business and I just want to ask them a trillion questions just because I'm curious about their business and what they're doing. And so I always thought I'd bring Jesus into a place that it's unexpected. you expect a pastor to talk about Jesus, but you don't expect a CEO to do something like that. So that was kind of my path. And then the summer before my senior year of college, the pastor that led me to Christ came up to me. I was supposed to be on a spring break trip, but that fell through last second. And he told me about a pastor that was looking for someone to fill in for him for the summer. And I said, gosh, I'm really interested in being a youth pastor. And he said, well, Adam, it's actually not the youth pastor, it's the head pastor. And I thought he had lost his mind. It was a church of probably 300-400 in size. And I had never preached a sermon. I had never done anything. Wow. And yet he encouraged me to do so. And through truly an act of God, there were so many variables that led into it. I ended up filling in for that pastor. And within the first week of filling in that summer, I knew it was what I was supposed to do for the rest of my life. Just the honor. There was 2-3 ladies in the church up north that had terminal cancer. And I've always been someone who wants to speak right to the heart, and kind of the fluff conversation. I'd much rather, how are you really doing? Yeah. And when you have terminal cancer, all the fluff leaves, and you just speak wisdom. You have perspective that you can't have until you know you're going to die. And it was just such an honor, not to mention being able to talk about Jesus. So I decided to go to seminary, finish my business degree, went to seminary out in Kentucky, and didn't want to start a church. And that wasn't my plan either. So every step of the way has been me saying that's a terrible idea. And then it ends up happening. So
that's awesome. And you were 24, I think, when you started the church, right? So are you like a backup quarterback being thrown in a game? Like, let's say the Patriots backup quarterback that never plays, right? Yeah. And he has no reps in an NFL game because Tom Brady never gets hurt. And he's thrown in to the fire now as a pastor. Is that kind of what it was like for you?
It was. Well, even that summer filling in for that pastor, I look back now and I just want to cringe. But when I was 24, here's the cool thing about the first 3 years as a church, we struggled to survive. We were at 100 people in worship and could not grow. And what was so neat about that was just getting reps. I mean, just getting reps. And when I say reps, preaching messages each and every week to 40 people, to 50 people. I mean, it wasn't these mass crowds. And I think it's easy in any field to look at success and you're like, man, I wonder what day they got that gig. Right. And it's like, oh, that wasn't one day. That was built on years of repetition, and where no one was seeing you, no one was noticing you, like you were a nobody. And yet, so it's like, that didn't just happen overnight. That happened I love how Jesus talks about in the secret, what's said and done in the secret will be shouted from the rooftops. Yeah. It's those years of doing the right thing, of working, of reps, and then God begins to honor it. So yeah, it was crazy. Still to this day, I can't believe I'm the pastor of this church. So
that's probably a good mentality to have, just to keep you humble every day when you get to go to work. You know, it's funny because when I was working at ESPN and I talked to a lot of younger people who were coming up out of college, it always felt like they wanted the sort of instant success of people who had gotten to whatever point they had gotten to. And it reminded me of what you just said, was that there's so much that goes into getting to the position that most people have. Have you seen that even in pastoring with a lot of young people? I know you have a lot of young people that go to your church. In trying to speak that truth into them, that it is a process and that you got to work hard. Nothing's given to you.
Nothing is given to you. And it almost scares me for people who do have overnight success. Yeah. Like you dream of it, like, gosh, like, please, please, please. And I have the fear of God. I'm like, no, please don't ever overnight. Yeah. Instead, Lord, would you just steadily build? And again, we would never say that. We don't want to steadily build and consistently be faithful. Those are like, whoa, right. You know? Yeah. And yet it's like, no, please, this consistently and faithfully build, Lord. Because the overnight stuff, a mutual friend of ours, Brad Lomenick. Sure. I met with him. I'll never forget this. This is probably 3-4 years ago. I said, Brad, like, how do I was basically saying exactly what I'm talking against right now. How do I get to that next place? Yeah. Like, how do I get to that next, whatever that even means? And he said, Adam, I'm not concerned about you getting to the next place. I'm concerned about your foundation. Will it be able to hold you when you get to that next place? Yeah. And I actually didn't really like his answer. I was like, no, that was the total opposite. And like, my foundation's great. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And yet, gosh, I really do. I have the kind of the fear of God for those people who have that overnightness that just kind of scares me a little bit. Instead, I think Christine Kane does a great job of talking about staying in your lane.
Yes.
And just like, nope, I'm just going to stay right here. I'm not going to get distracted by this. This is your call, God, in my life. And I'm just going to faithfully and consistently follow you. And you're going to be the one that opens doors.
That's good. And Brad, I'll tell you a quick story about Brad. So I met him probably 4 or 5 years ago through social media, listening to his old Catalyst podcast with Ken Coleman way back in the day. And I used to mow the lawn in the summer and listen to Brad and Ken rap about leadership and sports and all these other things. It was really my introductions to podcasting. And so we connected. And then about 3 years ago, when I was thinking about leaving ESPN, actually it was 4 years ago, Brad came to ESPN and got a tour, and we sat down at lunch, and I said to him, can you tell me if I'm crazy that I'm thinking about leaving ESPN, that this thought keeps coming into my mind? He goes, you're not crazy, but be careful. And I said, be careful. Why? He's like, because if you take this leap too quickly, it might not work out. It might not be God's timing. It might be yours. And it was a really, I don't know. It was just one of those moments for me that made me, and I just, we have to tell Brad that we're talking about him now, because he's going to love that we're having this conversation on the podcast. But it was a really good moment for me to know that not to press into my timing, but into God's timing, which is so hard to do because our feelings can get in the way of really what the Lord is trying to put together in his timing. How has that played out in your life, in whatever stage of this journey that you've been on? How has that played out in your life?
Yeah, so I'll just confess, I'm a person that's highly impatient.
Yeah.
I mean, it's every personality test I take, whether it's Enneagram or whatever, basically says I'm very, very impatient.
Yeah.
And so waiting is a hard thing for me. And yet I'm beginning to realize that God's plan is so much better than my plan will ever be. And I'm saying that in the richest, deepest way possible. Every time I try to attempt to do my plan and ends in brokenness and hurt and emptiness and restlessness, every time I just keep my eyes on him. God, what do you have for me today? What do you have for me right now? I just want to be faithful right now today. Every time I follow his plan, it leads to joy, peace, contentment, life, everything I'm searching for. And so I feel like I'm slowly getting to the place. I turned 37 this weekend.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm slowly getting to the place, and I'm such a slow learner on top of that, where I'm really beginning to say, God, I just want your plan. Like I genuinely just want your plan. And I think, for the longest time in my life, I really don't feel like I ever had to make a decision. And yet I've made many decisions. I'm married. I have 4 kids. I pastor a church. We have campuses, blah, blah, blah. And so I've obviously made a decision, but I feel like in God's kindness to me, he's always just made it so clear, like, and you're going to take this step right now. And you're going to take this step right now. And nope, that's not the right timing. So I'm going to completely shut that door. And so I think for me, one of the things I often pray is just, Lord, would you make this so clear? This decision, something I'm considering, would you make it either open every door or close every door?
Yeah.
That's all I'm praying for. Would you just make it clear? And I feel like God's been so faithful to do so.
Well, speaking of prayer, I mean, your book is called Talking with God. First of all, let me tell the audience real quick. When I got a copy of Adam's book, it came in a lunchbox with a pack, I think it was 1988 Topps baseball cards.
You're right.
And it might have been the greatest gift that I got in 2017. It was amazing because I even Facebook Lived this. I spent 30 minutes opening up each card and each player and just reminiscing from my childhood, because 1988 was teenage year wheelhouse for Jason and his sports loving baseball card collecting guy. So Adam, you spoke right to my heart with that gift, first of all, but it's one thing to get a gift and then you put the book to the side, which I'm sure many have done for my book too. But when you actually read the book, your book was awesome. It was really, really good. It's called Talking with God. It's been out now a couple years. I just want to ask you about the book. Why did you feel compelled at that point to write a book about prayer? Because prayer is hard for a lot of people. And even in my small groups, as I digress for a second, Adam, people who've been Christians for years and years are so uncomfortable praying, even just praying us out, which I'll say, okay, can you close us in prayer? And there'll be some people who will actually say to me, I'm not comfortable doing that in the setting. And I'm like, wait, you're a Christian. Of course you should be comfortable praying. But for many of us, we're not comfortable praying. So tell us about the meaning of the book, why you wrote it, and your heart behind it.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of the story of my life. I didn't want to write a book. And so I said no at a couple different times where it came up. I said no. And then a friend of mine who's a writer said, because I told him I'm not a writer. And he told me, Adam, I know you might not think you're a writer, but I feel like God's put something inside of you. Yeah. And I love having friends like that in my life. And for anybody listening, I pray that's true in your life, where you have friends who call out things inside of you that you don't see in yourself.
Yes.
Hey, I see this gift in you, Jason. Hey, I see this gift in you, Adam. You have this experience that you think is not a big deal, but it's actually a huge deal. You have this wisdom because you walk through this specific storm, that you can speak to somebody in the same storm that another person can't. Like, just having those people is so important. But so he kind of cornered me and said, I can get you a phone call with an agent who's really well respected, all this kind of stuff. Have you ever thought about what to write about? And I said, gosh, if there was one thing, it would be prayer. And he looked at me like he had seen a ghost. And I said, why, what? And he said, that's exactly what I was going to tell you to write about, was prayer. And I said, why? And he told me, Adam, you type up notes to me, and oftentimes you'll end your typed note with a prayer. And your tweets, a lot of times they're short, simple prayers. And when I became a Christian, I couldn't believe that God would want to hear anything from me. Growing up in the church, I didn't know that we could talk with the Lord. I thought it was more of just kind of something you speak to please some far off being. Right. And so when I realized that, it was such good news to we can talk with God and he hears our voice. And even again right now, I'm a pastor, my life could not be any better than it is right now today. And yet there's so many moments where I don't know what I would do if I didn't know I could speak with the Lord. Just in my times of brokenness, that I can ask for his healing, and in my time of restlessness, that I can ask for his peace, and when I've messed up, that I can ask for his grace. And even at night, sometimes when I can't fall asleep, just beginning to speak to him, like, Lord, would you just give me everything you are? And so just knowing that we can speak with the Lord is such a gift. And yet what you said, prayer, whether you grew up in the church or not, is one of those things that you feel awkward asking questions about. It's almost like a coworker. At some point, it's awkward to ask what their name is if you don't know what their name is.
Right, yeah.
And I think the same is true with prayer. Whether you grew up in the church or not, it's like, you're an adult. You should know how to pray. Because everybody says thoughts and prayers are with you. It's just kind of something you say. Yeah. And so because of that, you don't feel like you can ask. I actually don't know how to pray, or I feel like I'm stuck in a rut. And so my hope was just for it to be simple, lighthearted. I'm about as cheesy as they come. Yeah, it was. It was great. And then also just really heartfelt. So I pray it would connect with that person who does not know how to pray, but also that longtime follower of Jesus who just has gotten in a rut. It's almost like someone whose marriage who's grown cold. That they're married, they're still married, but it's just changed, and not in a good way. And so I hope it just kind of ignites someone's relationship with Jesus again. And one of my closest mentors passed away a couple of summers ago. He was 93 years old, just this legend of the faith. And the last conversation we had was about prayer. And he told me, he said, Adam, I'm just barely scratching the surface. And I feel like I'm just learning. And he was a mentor for Dallas Willard, for Richard Foster. Oh, geez. This crazy legend person. And to hear Roger talk about feeling like he's just scratching the surface in the area of prayer was pretty awesome to hear.
I mean, if that isn't a goal for all of us as believers, to still be saying I'm just scratching the surface on our last day on earth.
Yeah.
Holy cow, right?
Yeah. Well, even how cool would that be just in our relationship with Jesus, but also in our relationship with our spouse.
Yeah.
Gosh, like to be able to say, I've been married 30 years and I'm still learning new things about her.
Yeah. Well, I can say that. I'm 20 years this year, and I'm still learning a lot. Let me put it that way. There's still long ways to go, Adam.
There's still a long ways to go.
Well, let me ask you about the book reception. That's always fun, and I know I've been so blessed and privileged to be able to go out and speak and share with people about my story and then hear responses back from people about it. What has that been like for you? And maybe share a story that sticks out. Maybe it could even have been somebody who we would call an influencer or celebrity that read your book or whatever, but any story that stands out about talking with God that you just kind of shook your head at and like, man, okay, God, I see this is why you wanted me to write the book, just for this moment.
Yeah, I got to say a couple things quick. So the one of the things that really just hits me is Chris Brown. He used to be on the Ramsey team. He talks about scalability. Chris is just a great dude. He talks about scalability, and what's so cool about a book or a podcast or whatever is you can be playing with your kids and someone is still being encouraged in their love for Jesus through you. Like that part is just really cool. I mean, I wrote this book a couple years ago now. And still almost on a daily basis, we'll have someone tweet me or message me and talk about the impact that it's had on their life. Well, one person who's not an influencer, she was a grandma. She bought a copy she was somewhere in Georgia. She bought a copy of the book for all of her grandkids who are, it sounds like they're in their 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. And she bought a copy for all of her kids and our grandkids, and went on a weekly basis, walk through the book with them.
Wow.
And so she sent me this card, and it was so wonderful. I'm like, here's this grandma I've never met from Georgia that is encouraging. One of her kids is a marketing person at Chick-fil-A at the time. And she said he's began praying and just cool stuff. So just cool things there. The other one, when I was out doing the book tour, had a former pitcher, just kind of a stud baseball player, did well, World Series, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
Came up to me after one of the nights. I had never met him before. He had retired a couple of years earlier. And he said, man, that really connected with me, your talk about the book. And just thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I knew who he was when he walked up. And he walked away, came back, and he said, this is really crazy. I just feel like I'm supposed to give you my number. And I was like, well, okay. And he just said, I don't know. I just feel like we're supposed to stay in contact. And just so cool to see someone like himself in his, I think it's his hometown area. So he's probably very well known in that area of the country. Just wanting to hear about prayer as well. I mean, I don't care how many World Series you've been in, you're still a human being with a soul who longs to connect with Jesus. Yeah. And so it's so cool even hearing just it connect with him as well was really, really humbling.
I love that. A couple more questions here with Adam Weber, the pastor of Embrace Church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This is sort of a generic question. I'm always fascinated with the answers. We asked this once to, now I'm going to name drop and sound like I'm name dropping. I hate this, but we asked this to Francis Chan once, and we asked this to Matt Chandler. So I'm going to ask it to you, Adam Weber. What's breaking your heart in the church right now? What's been a burden that is just really wrecking you a little bit lately and just touching your soul? What's breaking your heart?
Yeah. Wow. Great question. I think two things currently have just been on my radar. As a pastor, one of the things you hear a lot about is going deeper.
Yeah.
And really, I just want to go deeper, and I want more meat. I want more substance. I want more whatever. And really just trying to break down, what does that mean? And I think in a sense, a lot of times when we think about being consumer Christians, we think about lights and haze machines and whatever else. And that's true. And yet on the other side, I think there's also another part of it where the consumer is, hey, pastor, hey, church, care for me spiritually. Like not just care for me, but like cover all the bases for me. And it's like that would never kind of be criticized as consumer, and yet it really is. And so I think my heart has just been like, what does it mean to go deeper? It's not more information. It can be, and that information is not bad, and understanding about who God is. Deeper means falling more in love with Jesus and becoming more like him. And impacting every part of our lives. And so on the way to small group, it's stopping to help someone that dropped their groceries on the side of the road. I think that's been something that's really been heavy on my heart is, Jesus, I want to become more like you. I want to do more things that you do. And so I think it's been that, like, what does true depth mean? I hope I don't become an educated Christian, and not that that's wrong. Instead, I want to be a Christian who's more in love with Jesus, and you just can't help but miss the Jesus inside of me. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it, I think, is just kind of a lack of caring in our relationship with God sometimes. I see it in my own life as well. These other things become much more important. And with other things, whether it's sports, something great, or relationships, it's like I would never cut corners on any of that. But my relationship with God, I'll cut corners all the time. It's like, well, I just don't have enough time. We can't afford to do that. Like that family that needs help, we can't really help them because we need to do this. And so I think that's really focused at myself as well, of just kind of a, like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Instead of like, no, Jesus, I am so passionate about you that I can't wait to just live another day and hopefully just, bump someone a little bit closer to Jesus. And I just want you to take over every part of my life. So that's kind of two different answers, but things that I've really been kicking around, because when we're on fire for Jesus and we're just being used by him, this is not a brag moment at all. I have nothing to brag about at all. Right. I mean it. I don't know up from down most days. Last night though, so right now in Sioux Falls, we're experiencing flooding. Yes. This weekend we're supposed to have possibly the worst flood in our city's history, just with the snow melt up north. And so I went and helped sandbag last night, and it was so good for the soul, just seeing all these people coming together in a time that our country feels really divided. And it was so good for the soul. And I'm like, God, as a follower of Jesus, this is where I need to be right now. And just being able to encourage people. I told families as they drove up their pickups to be loaded up with sandbags, hey, praying for you this weekend. Pray that this is all just a total waste of time. And, it was just so cool. And so those moments are the moments where I feel like I went deeper in my relationship with God. So
it's really, really good. Let me ask you, you mentioned about caring about other things as we wind down here. There's a weird tension that I think a lot of pastors who are quote unquote known have, because you're in this sort of bubble of people who are known and popular within a certain genre. And, you have a book and you have a podcast and you have a lot of people coming to watch you on Sundays, or coming to church, I should say, and you are the pastor on Sundays. And yet, there's so much of the world that just is like, who are you? Who are me? Who am I? And yes. I wonder what that tension is like for you, because I think we've all struggled with this a little bit about, like you say, being known, or, you talked to Brad a couple of years back, and how can I take it to the next level? And what is the next level? Is the next level going deeper with God, or is the next level selling more books and sort of being more known and getting more followers on Twitter and writing the next book and getting more people to listen to the podcast? That's a tension for a lot of people. Do you have that tension as well?
Oh, I think anybody has that tension, regardless of your following. I think you have that tension, and Henry Cloud talks about inside of us. There's something's not all good and some bad. It's kind of a combination of the two. Yeah. And so I think sometimes we are off center in our relationship with God, and we're doing godly things for our own self gain. And then the same exact things, we're right with God, and it looks no differently to anybody else, but it's all fully for him.
Right.
And our heart is sold out for him. And it's been such a weird thing in my own life. I'm a lot like my dad in the sense, my dad was an electrician before he had to retire. He's a guy that loves to fly underneath the radar. And that is the story. I mean, my dad is just the kind, soft-spoken, he's got a Facebook account so he can keep tabs on his kids because he loves them so much and his grandkids.
Yeah.
But I mean, he has no fouling, no nothing. And I'm wired so much like that. I want to live underneath the radar, and even didn't want to become a pastor. And yet God just continues like, here you go, here you go, here you go. And so it's like, God, I don't want these pedestals. I know how imperfect I am. I thank God that I'm a church where every single week, this last Sunday, I said, folks, if you haven't realized it yet, Embrace is the most imperfect church that I've ever been a part of. And the lead pastor doesn't know up from down. So don't follow me. Don't follow me. Let's go follow the one who's perfect together.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just making that clear. But my son was just telling me about the parable of the talents the other night. He learned about it at youth. And that's been my story of like, on my own, I just want to bury the talents in the ground. I don't want to face criticism. I don't want naysayers. I don't want people who have never met me to hate me for unknown reasons. Sure. And so my natural tendency is to hide. But in Hebrews, it says it's impossible to please God without faith. Mm. And so for me, I'm like, gosh, Lord, I want to be pleasing to you. I want to live a life that's pleasing to you. And so the main reason I didn't want to do it is because I didn't want haters.
Right.
So you do the book, and I did get some haters, and it's easy to let the haters outweigh everything else. It's easy to let them outweigh the grandma from Georgia that bought a copy for all our grandkids, and they're falling more in love with Jesus. Yeah. It's easy to forget about the pitcher who came up to me and it really ministered to him. So I really struggle with more of just feeling so inadequate to be used by God. A while back, someone said, I'm just praying that you could stay humble and stay on your knees. And I said, well, gosh, I'm so grateful for that. Definitely pray for that. But honestly, right now I'm in a season of not staying on my knees. I'm in a season of struggling to stand because I feel so unworthy. And I think all of us face those moments of like, do people realize that I'm an imperfect sinner and I'm going to get up and talk to all of you?
Yeah.
And so that's really the tension that I face so much, is just that feeling so unworthy. And I think at different seasons, though, I struggle with the opposite of finding my worth and identity. And do I have a check mark by my Instagram?
Right.
It's like, what does that matter? do I have this or that? In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't. Our influence, our platform is one of those things that's here today and gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so that's not what I want to live for, but it's easy to get caught up in those traps. And when I am living for those things, my identity, my peace, my joy is everywhere. But when I'm just like, Jesus, I just want to follow you today, regardless of what happens, regardless of whatever, my who I am, my value is the same forever. And I'm so grateful for that.
It's really good. Adam Weber has been our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Adam, thanks for being here, brother. And let's get you back after the Bengals win the Super Bowl, and we'll have a chat about some football and your Cincinnati Bengals. How's that sound?
If the Bengals win a Super Bowl, you'll probably see me go off the radar for like a good year. I'll just be celebrating.
I was going to say, I probably won't even be able to find you if they win, right?
Exactly.
That's awesome. Adam, thanks for being here, brother. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you. Thank you for the work you're doing and the ways that God's using you, Jason.
Yes, sir.
You won't find a nicer guy around than Adam Weber. And to be the pastor of a thriving church, I just imagine all the people who go to that church and know that he's your pastor. You're in good hands there. And I can see why it's dubbed one of the fastest growing churches in America a couple years ago. Adam's church, again, if you're in the South Dakota area, is called Embrace Church. His book is a must-read. Pick it up on Amazon. It's called Talking with God. And you can give Adam a follow on Twitter, just at his name, Adam Weber, Weber. And also his podcast is worth a listen as well. Really good conversations there, simply called The Conversation. You can subscribe on Apple, iTunes, everywhere podcasts are found. For Adam Weber
And we thank Adam for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. We also thank our sponsors, Compassion International, $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. You can sponsor a child today, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. It's Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Sponsor a child today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. We'll see you next time with a brand new episode here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day.